Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm just going to share quickly, see if I can manage that. Again, I did try this morning and it worked well. As I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about biosecurity and early warnings. And the reason why we need to do that is that these are topics that's not always well defined. So I've put a few questions there, and I try to put it in perspective of where we're going on a more global level, but also what can we do in South Africa, and how can we what is our position? Are we winning the game or are we failing? And that's where we are, more or less. So a little bit of background. You all know about the global goals of sustainable development. And these goals are trying to be reached by 2030. And now we are in 2021. We have almost 2 years of COVID-19 lockdowns, which puts brakes on a lot of things. And the question is, are we going anywhere? And how is biosecurity now influencing perhaps global goals for sustainable development? So these are the goals. There's 17 of them, and you might have heard of most of them, and they deal with a number of topics. But if we look at biosecurity, maybe we can say it deals with protecting the planet. And if it deals with protecting the planet, it may also deal with clean water and sanitation. And if that is a fact, then we can also protect life on land. So life on land already gives you some clues on perhaps biosecurity. That will help us to get good jobs. So some of these are chicken eggs. So I didn't put them in a specific order, but they may. This is just a way that my thinking patterns happen to go. Good jobs and economic growth will lead to innovation. Innovation may lead to new biotechnology, a topic which Professor Wingfield has talked about yesterday quite a bit. That may reduce poverty if we start to grow the economy. Poverty reduction helps to quality education, or maybe just good jobs gives us quality education, or maybe good quality education gives us good jobs. Whatever the priority of that, or the timeline is, all of that can go to more responsible consumption, less pollution, more recycling, etc., and better food usage. And better food usage may lead to no hunger or less hunger. That may help us to get crime rates down and peace and justice. So what is biosecurity? And the clearest example is the coronavirus, perhaps. But if you look at a few definitions in the past, we talk about the Cambridge definition, which is clearly looking at animals and people. And the Oxford definition clearly looks at more at humans, to protect humans as such. Then the FAO has got a different definition, and the FAO looks at agriculture, which includes animals and humans. And maybe that is where one can start to focus. And the reason why I'm saying that is biosecurity is not really in every of the legislation well defined that I could find. There's a couple of countries who uses biosecurity loosely. They form government structures on biosecurity. They form legislation on biosecurity without it really being defined. So one can assume it's basically the definition from the FAO. So it talks about strategic and integrated approaches. It talks about analyzing and managing relative risks to human, animal, and plant health, as well as the environment. And it also talks about policy and regulatory frameworks. So that's more or less the basis of this. So what is early warnings if we talk about early warnings? That is the integrated system of hazard monitoring. Now, this is a UN definition: forecasting and prediction, disaster risk assessment, communication and preparedness activities, systems and processes that enables individuals, communities, governments, businesses, and others to take timely action to reduce disaster risk and advance in hazardous events. So this is a disaster management definition. It is not anywhere else differently, or there's a lot of other places where it's differently defined. And if you have to relate it to plants, we can simply say we want to see which pests are coming and how are we going to manage them if they are here, and how are we going to detect them early enough. So that is basically what we're saying. I deliberately put a picture there of full armyworm, and yesterday Dr. Roger Price elaborated quite a bit on full armyworm, and it's a hot topic in agriculture right across the globe. And I've put it there for a reason, and we will talk about that maybe a little bit later. What elements can we put in as early warnings elements? Maybe horizon scanning, modeling programs such as Climax, prioritization, mapping tools, survey applications. Today, if you have a new pest in the country, there's at least 3 companies which tell you we've got developed an app already to find it. So that is a very, very dynamic industry, which is good, but it's also confusing. Data management tools, pest risk assessments are necessary, preparedness plans, pest surveillance networks, diagnostic capacity, awareness of all these pests. You can see there's a little picture there of the Oriental Fruit Fly in South Africa to control the removal of goods like fruit. Rapid response are incredibly important. Most pests cannot be eradicated if you wait too long. So once you've detected them, it's actually already too late. So if you can do something on the pest, then you need to do it very quickly. Legislation to do all the things that you want to do, and of course money. I always put money in there somewhere because we can't do anything without funding. So back to trade and world, we know that we are trading goods all over the place. So there's a constant trade of produce. This map is not particularly accurate. I just wanted to illustrate that all countries has got goods that they trade and that they receive. And South Africa in particular has got a very good agricultural export industry, but also a good import industry. So the difference between the net export and we've got a net export industry, but the difference between exports and imports are not really that big. So what are we protecting? Our pests are threatening our food. And yesterday we also talked about that. And we know that there's a heck of a lot of pests already identified in different areas. And we know that it costs us a lot of money. So the US figures there, which is a little bit old already, but 540 billion per year is a lot of money, which can be avoided or it can be reduced. Back to fall armyworm, and that is currently still one of the top 10 arthropod pests globally. And there's reasons for that. So we know that we trade a lot of products, and we know it's a big business. We talk about over $1 trillion. So, but what do we find in pests? What type of pests do we find in these products? So if we break it down a little bit, fresh fruit, it's mainly fruit flies and lepidopteran borers. There's also a lot of external pests like mealybugs and thrips, etc. But the main ones, which is all intercepted by importing countries, are fruit flies, lepidopterans, such as Mediterranean fruit fly and false codling moth. Grain, normally storage pests, and those are pests like the larger grain borer or the lesser grain borer, for instance, or the grain weevil. Ornamentals and propagation has got all the smaller type of pests like thrips and whiteflies, scales, mealybugs. And those you normally would find in ornamental plants. A lot of mites nowadays also are picked up, and a lot of pathogens. That is a good trend. The problem with pathogens is there may be a large list of pathogens on commodities like propagation material, and it's difficult to test for all of them. So it's not always done. And that is a big risk. Of all the interceptions in the EU, 73% is on fruit. And one needs to take that into context that maybe they're only looking at fruit. But we know that fruit flies are the most intercepted, and the figures has been risen up to 2030, and then the EU came up with a solution. They made the import more strict for fruit flies, and so we all suffer because of that. So we have to have systems approaches in place to enable us to export to the EU. So where do we stand? We have some governing bodies in the world. The World Trade Organization is primarily there to help us to trade. So its objective is to trade as much as we can, as quickly as we can. And the problem is then we are spreading pests. So they developed an agreement, which is called the WTO Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement which helps us to put some basic rules on how to trade with plants and plant products and animal products, which will make animals, humans, and plants safe. So these are the 14 articles of those. I'm not going to go into them too much. All I want to illustrate is that they include assessment of risk and the determination of appropriate level of protection. They also help us they also indicate control, inspection, and approval. And they talk about harmonization of these measures. So, and then there's also obviously technical assistance with that. So what is that? That relates to biosecurity, and it already indicates some elements of an early warning system. So there's a little bit of global backup from the WTO on that. Then the WTO prescribes standard setting bodies for these. The one that deals with plants are International Plant Protection Convention, and they help us to develop a lot of standards for this. Other international organizations is the United Nations, and they provide food and assistance for 80 million people in 80 countries, and assistance protects 65 million people fleeing war, famine, and persecution. And famine is incredibly important in many countries where there's war. So food needs to be produced, and we know we don't produce enough. So therefore, the FAO under the United Nations is to help alleviate hunger, and it also helps to fight pests, as we can now see a lot of assistance that the FAO has put into the spread of fall armyworm. And I use fall armyworm as a baseline here because it's probably the worst scenario that we had lately. What does the IPPC do? It's an old organization. It's a treaty, and it develops standards, as I've already said. So the idea there is to prevent and control the introduction and spread of pests and enhancing global food security, to protect the environment, economic and trade development, and phytosanitary measures. The intent there is to have them scientifically based. So science needs to be put into the whole mix there. So the new revised text of the IPPC gives us surveillance of growing plants, and also have a pest risk analysis in the mix there as well, which goes back to early warning systems into that regard. So they also have basic principles and one of that is to manage risk, and operational principles include pest risk analysis, pest listing, recognition of pest-free areas of low pest prevalence, official control of regulated plant pest systems, approach, surveillance, pest reporting, prompt action, and emergency measures. So all of that allows countries or members from the treaty to develop measures that can assist us. Thus, phytosanitary measures and actions of pre and post introduction of pests, and which is a clear indication of an early warning system. Then there's also international. The phytosanitary measures are that there are 44 adopted ISPMs, 29 diagnostic protocols, and 39 phytosanitary treatments. So why is legislation important? Without legislation, we cannot draw a proper pest risk analysis. not proper surveillance networks, rapid response, eradication, and pest-specific awareness plans are difficult if there's no legislation to back it up. And then also for export compliance, it's important that we develop area-wide integrated management programs, such as the SIT program for Mediterranean fruit fly. The importation of host material must consider movement into, from, through, and within the country. So if we don't have proper systems for all of that, there's a gap, and then that creates a potential for a pest to establish. So what are we protecting? As I've already said, worldwide it's a lot, but in South Africa we've got a large industry. Just to get back to the citrus industry, we've got 90 million rands worth of exports. Grapes is 9 billion. 9 billion. Wine is 8 billion, and apples 7 billion. Nuts are 5 billion. So we're already getting growing industries in a wide range, and that's only for exports, not even locally produced. South Africa, we've got several pieces of legislation. I'm not going to go into that too much, just to say that on both for import and for national control, we are covered in terms of legislation. How do we manage this? Now, for pests that come into the country, we develop systems. I've already indicated the national the emergency plant protection plan, and we also work on collaboration with industries and science. So for fall armyworm, there's a steering committee, which were very successful in initial outbreaks, and also for pests that's not yet in the country, such as the citrus greening Asian strain. We already have a steering committee, and we collaborate a lot with scientists to develop contingency or preparedness plans for that. Some recent pests in South Africa, which is incredibly important to follow. These are just the short list. There's quite a number of these pests coming into South Africa. And we know quite a bit of many of them. Some of the which we don't know less about is the blueberry butt mite, the red palm mite, banana bunchy top virus, perhaps, and then also macadamia felted cosset. Those are pests that's coming into the country, and there's a picture of the damage macadamia felted cosset can cause to macadamia trees, which is just a cosset, but it's causing a lot of damage. And the only other areas in the world where it occurs is Australia and Hawaii. We also have another trend, and that is that pests are spreading at a tremendous rate. And we can see that in the whole of Africa, or most of Africa, for larger grain borer was about 10 years, but about 20 years for Oriental Fruit Fly was about 10 years, for Tuta absoluta 10 years, but that needs to be put in perspective. It was in 2006 in Morocco, 2013 in Senegal, and then 2016 South Africa. So that's a heck of a rate. Then comes fall armyworm, 1 year, and it's across the whole continent as far as we know. And they all probably crossed our borders by simply flying over. So once they're in the continent, they spread at a big rate. So fall armyworm is one of those pests that's important. I just give you a few examples of those that we're working closely with now. Then there's also Oriental Fruit Fly. Professor De Beer talked yesterday about the shuttle borer, so I'm not going to repeat that. Banana bunchy top virus is an incredibly important pest. Now, this is a Oriental Fruit Fly picture there. We got a carton of mangoes from Spar, and we bred adult flies out of all of those mangoes, and that was about 2 years ago, and I kept it in the fridge for photography purposes, and the moment they heated up, they started to try and oviposit. So these things, they just want to go and multiply. So fall armyworm is a more migratory pests, and I see I'm going to run a little bit out of time, so I'm going just to go quickly over these slides. But the point here is that this pests are spreading tremendously. It's spread all over South Africa, but it's still regulated. So this is what happens globally with fall armyworm. You would see 2016 in Africa spread in 1 year across the whole of Africa almost. That is not the big thing. The big thing is now across the whole of the globe. So these pests were in the Americas for millennia, and then the moment they got into Africa, it spread across the world. So what have we missed about that? And that's a question we need to take home, baby. Then Oriental Fruit Fly is still a problem. I'm not going to go through all the regulatory issues on that. Banana bunch top virus. And if you can see there, that bottom part of the bunch is supposed to have fruit on, and it doesn't have, and it creates stunted growth. So this is a big problem in Ugu district, and probably the most economic pest on the banana industry in South Africa. Then you can see the global distribution of that, and then there's also serious pests that are not yet in the country, the Asian strain of citrus greening, and then also Fusarium wilt, which is incredibly important, and a couple of other fruit flies. Citrus greening, I just put this article there. The issue there, which is important, is that in Brazil, the disease has eliminated 52.6 million sweet orange trees. Those are more than all the trees that we have in South Africa. So that is a major problem. Why is it such a major problem? Is that both of these pathogens and vectors occurs now and in Kenya. So this pest has got a vector in Africa, which is going to spread it much quicker, and probably it will get here in the next few years. And that's the reason why we've got large dependency on the citrus industry to help us prepare for this pest's arrival. Same with Fusarium wilt. This is the most serious disease. You can't cure it. It needs to be eliminated. The latest is in Peru just recently. It's now also on the radar of the FAO and the Ippc. And for Africa, the problem is it's in northern Mozambique. It's a major risk for the region. Also, that area where it occurs in Mozambique is now in a I don't know if we can say political unrest, but that's probably what it is. So the government cannot really enter those areas, so we don't know what the control of it and the spread of this pest is currently. Exotic fruit flies, as mentioned yesterday by Roger also, it creates a lot of damage, and specifically to small-scale farmers, and we need to control that. So is biosecurity failing? Are we doing it? What have we missed about fall armyworm? Why was it not on the radar of anyone? And that is a problem with what we have, because you never know which pest will react that large. Some will give us that, some will not. So those that we prioritize is not always the ones that we think what is actually causing the damage. So all the principles are sound, but the pests still find their ways into countries. With better detection and diagnostic techniques, maybe we will detect more pests. And I think we are, specifically with next generation sequencing. Maybe the volumes in trade and tourism outweighs the risk management. It's just too big. We cannot cope. Better global interaction is maybe a solution. And what about a PPP between government, science, and industry to ensure capacity and funding for early detection and rapid response? So those are the things that we need to work on in the future. What else can be done? I've already alluded to that, and that is a global and a regional responses. We cannot, as a country, deal with these things. We need to deal with it more collectively. Awareness is incredibly important. Diagnostic networks, we can't detect anything and test for everything ourselves. We need collaboration with scientists, scientific advisory boards, as to say, and projects in terms of the WTO. Those provide funding. And the most important thing is pest notification. Please talk to each other. Once a pest is new in an area, just report it. So that's more or less my talk. Thank you.